Hello, my fellow comic book collectors. This is part 2 of my series of Did I Overpay? And what this series is really about is looking at restored comics and determining whether or not you have overpaid for buying a restored version of a comic. Sometimes it's really great to buy a restored comic because you can get something that looks nice, looks more presentable, and at a very, very discounted price. I remember seeing a Batman #1, and it was a 9, I think it was a 9.0, and it was extensively restored, and it was like 1/10 of the price of a normal Batman #1. I was like, wow, that's such a good deal. But is it? You don't know until you kind of do the math and kind of look at the comparables. So uh, this is what this video is really about, is teaching people how to basically determine the value of a restored comic versus a non-restored comic, and really figuring out what to bid or price those comics at so that you can buy smart. Make sure you buy at the right price, because you don't want to overpay for things. If you can get that blue label, it's so much easier to know that you paid the right amount. You can look at the fair market value and really make that determination. But when you're buying the restored one, there is a bit of subjectiveness to it. A lot of people look at what kind of restoration was done, and there's just there is that kind of feeling that when you're buying restored, it can, there can be negative connotations to it, where you kind of want to know if you can get it to a blue label. And what I mean by that is sometimes restoration can be undone. Now, I've seen comics where there's what's called slight restoration, where what you can do is, if it's a slight restoration where it's just like some mild color touch, you can actually remove that color touch and resubmit it and get that blue label. Now, what will happen is it will get a lower grade, because the color touch generally does improve the look of the comic. But sometimes you can be lucky and it actually doesn't impact the grade. And just moving from a blue label, from a purple label to a blue label is huge. It can really, really impact the value. So sometimes when people look at restoration, they look for that opportunity. Can I reverse the restoration and get that blue label? Now, some restoration, that's impossible. When it's moderate to extensive restoration, it's generally, there's enough done to that book where it can't be reversed. For example, one of the most common things that gives it that moderate restoration is when the edges are trimmed. And I'm going to show you an example of this in in this video with a comic that I got that was restored, and it had those edges that are trimmed. You can't reverse that. Once those edges are trimmed, they're gone. So I'm going to show you my Fantastic Four #1, and I'm going to read to you the notes from this comic. Restoration includes color touch, pieces added, tear seals, reinforced, reglossed, staples replaced, top and right edges trimmed. Okay, that's a lot of restoration. Okay, so this got, if you can see, it's a 5.0. One sec here, I'll try to zoom it in a bit. Hopefully you can see. It's a 5.0 B5. Now the B5 means that it's semi-professional, and that it is, the 5 represents that it is extensive restoration. You can hear just by the notes itself that it's an extensive restoration that was done on this comic. And that generally does kill the price. Okay, so I'm going to show you how that impacted the price of this comic. And the question is, did I overpay? Okay, so I'm going to tell you how much I paid for this comic. I paid, what was it? I bid on it on auction, and the bid was $4,200, and I won at $4,200. But then there's always the buyer's premium, which is another 20%. So the price became 5,040. Okay, so just we can ballpark it at 5,000 that I paid. So uh, was that an overpay? Well, let's take a look at the value of Fantastic Four number one. So we look at this chart here. Now I wish it was a higher grade, but hey, now it's a 5.0. So if we look at 5.0s, they sell for about $16,000. Okay, so a 5.0 sells for $16,000. So we know that 5.0 selling for 16,000. And what we can do is we look at this chart. I have like another chart where I can really say, okay, what is the level of restoration? It's a Silver Age comic. It's graded at a 5, which is between a 4 and a 6, and the restoration is extensive. Okay, so basically we can say that it's between these two numbers, 0.30 and 0.4. So this is the multiplier. You take this number and you're going to multiply it by whatever the real value is, the fair market value is of that comic. So when I do that math, I get a price of $5,600. Okay, so that comic that looks like it should be worth, 16,000 is, after the restoration really kills the value of it. It's worth about $5,600. Now I paid around 5,000 for it, so I'm in that I got a good deal. But so it's really close. It was like it could have been the other way around where I overpaid. It was very, very close. So I saved about 10% on the price. It's not as big of a savings as you might have thought. To think of a $16,000 comic and it's really worth only $5,600. So that's how much restoration really impacts the grade, the value of a comic. And it's just something to be aware of when you're buying comics, that you have to understand how much does that restoration impact the grade, the value. And I'll just leave this chart up for a few seconds here so you can sort of get these numbers. And this is a really useful chart, and it will help you basically save when you're buying restored, if you're trying to find good deals. I mean, that's the reason we buy restored, is to really save some money. Instead of paying 16,000, I could get it for 5. It's a pretty big savings. And, I don't really mind restoration too much if the comic looks better. There is certain types of restoration I don't like, and I'm not super happy with my Fantastic Four number one. And the reason being is because it is an extensive restoration. Like the fact that the edges are trimmed, I don't really like that because there is no reversing that. But overall, I'm very happy to have Fantastic Four number one, and because it's a very cool comic, and the restoration in this case does look good. I mean, it doesn't negatively impact. If it was like really, really trimmed, where it really impacts the size of the book, maybe even impacts the potential art inside the book, then I'd be more worried about it. But the things that kind of, I'm a little bit more paranoid about are things when they say pieces added. And generally that could be that sometimes you'll see married copies where they take the centerfold from one comic and then they mix it with another comic, and in order to get that complete comic. But it's it's a restoration, and there's no reversing that because it's two comics that have been sort of Frankenstein together. And it's really a personal preference that people want something that's a little bit more original, and you got to find that balance. Personally, I don't really mind the restorations because it makes them more affordable, and you get a nicer looking comic for a better price. But it's one of those questions. What do you think? Do you think restoration does negatively impact the value of the comic, and how much? Like I'm using a chart that I found online But you know, and it's fairly accurate. It seems to be what the GPA or Go Collect pricing model seems to be, that how much restoration does impact the value. So it's just a question of um, what do you like? What's your preference? Would you buy a purple label? And I'll leave those comments in below and tell me what you think. So this has been part 2 of my little series of Did I Overpay? Fortunately, I'm 2 for 2. I didn't overpay, but I'm going to show you, I might do more of these videos, maybe part 3 or 4, if you enjoy them. And just give me the feedback below and tell me what you want to see and have me talk about. Thanks. Bye for now. Bye.